Welcome to the Family Imprint Show. Thanks so much for joining me today. My name's Joanna, and I'm here with my colleague, Randi. I've got here beside me her incredible book, The Parent Gap, and I've got a few questions for Randi, and I just want to welcome you here to the show.
Thanks for having me.
It's great to have you here. I love the work you do with families, and so I certainly wanted to share that with the clients and friends that are listening. I'm curious, what are the most common challenges you notice with the clients that you work with on a day-to-day basis?
It seems that most people that come to me have one particularly challenging child.
Ah,
And I know that that was my story as well. My oldest son I like to, he's now 19. He's a sophomore in college. But I like to describe him as the baby that seemed to never stop crying.
mm,
And it wasn't colic. And so I just was on a mission to figure out how to happy him up. And and no matter what I did, it seemed like it wasn't really working. And that kind of propelled me to uncover all of these different layers to, it's not really my job to happy him up. It's my job to just understand how he came into this world and how he's naturally wired. So it seems that, and what I know now about him is that he has a sensitive nervous system.
okay.
And there's a theory by Elaine Aron that 20% of the population have extra sensitive nervous systems.
Hmm.
And so the world is more stimulating to this 20%. And so even as a small baby, it was like he had an extra startle reflex. And it was before before the happiest baby on the block taught us how to properly swaddle.
Yeah.
And so I remember feeling so much guilt because I couldn't get this baby to sleep, and I finally turned him over on his tummy. And I was so worried because we were exhausted.
Yeah.
And so most people that come to me, what I know immediately is that they have one of these kids with these sensitive nervous systems, because these kids with the sensitive nervous systems, they propel us to learn a new way of raising them. And if we don't learn this new way, they perpetually feel misunderstood. And so so I find a lot of the people that come to me have been sleep deprived for a long time, because these kids have a hard time sleeping. In our world today, there's so much artificial stimulation from every screen imaginable.
I think when we first met, Randi, what I loved and kind of leaned into about your description of your book was this idea, and I guess it's because the name of your book, The Parent Gap, this idea of who we imagine will be, before those kids come along, and then the reality of how we show up when we're tired, when we're super frustrated or at our wits' end with the child. And so maybe say more a little bit about that, the in-between place of where we imagine and where we end up.
Yeah, and what I've heard from a lot of the parents I've worked with recently is they say, I don't even know who I imagined I would be as a parent, but I know who I want to be now, and I beat myself up on a regular basis that I'm not showing up as that parent. And so the gap is, there's this gap between the parent that you want to be, which is, of course, the parent that it doesn't yell at your children, is super patient, really is able to show up as this just kind of calm, positive, patient force. So there's that version. And then there's the parent that we currently are, especially when we have one of these extra challenging kids who is not just pushing our buttons, but stomping on our buttons. And everything it seems like we say or we suggest, they want to do the opposite. And so we find ourselves being pushed to a place where we're behaving in a way that we really don't want to behave, but we don't know another way. And so what I help parents do is retrain their own brains so that they're able to close the gap and show up as the parent they want to be, no matter how your child's behaving. So being able to say, wait a minute, this is not about me. My child's acting out right now because basic needs need to be met. They're hungry. They're tired. You know what? We're not going to go out and do whatever right now. We're going to go, we're going to rest our bodies, and you're going to take a nap. There aren't any screens today. There's no artificial simulation, because we got to take a step back, and we need to really just be present and listen to what your body is telling you.
And what an amazing gift to have that direction to go back into self. Think about how that will serve them as adults. And, you know, the overstimulation happens all around us with deadlines and traffic jams and financial constraints, all of these things. That's a huge life lesson. I love that.
Well, I've seen it with my 19-year-old son big time. And he's now in college. And I called him when he was studying for his finals. And he was real, he was real short with me. And my brain, so if I was in the gap, I would have said something to him like, look, I just called to check on you. I don't deserve for you to speak to me that way. That is disrespectful. I am your mother, blah, 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 blah. We go into the lecture mode. And so that's what the new parenting conversation really is that I teach is, it's unnecessary. First of all, lectures don't work. They fall on deaf ears, and they make the other person defensive. And so I have the choice. If I stay out of the gap, I have the choice not to take his behavior personally. And in that moment, and I know I took a deep breath, because as humans, we have this amazing access to breath, which literally lowers our cortisol levels, allows us to be in our prefrontal lobe and think clearly. And in that moment, I thought, immediately, this is how I know the brain reprogramming works. I thought, okay, he's stressed right now. He's trying to study for finals. Who knows if he got enough sleep last night? Who knows if he's tall and thin and he doesn't always listen to the signals of his body. And so in that moment, I said, it sounds like you're studying right now. I'm just going to let you go. Call me if you want to talk later. And he said, okay, bye. I didn't take it personally. He's home, fast forward a week later, he's home for winter break. And I was making light of it, making a joke of something. And I said, yeah, like when I called you for finals, you were totally short with me. And he was like, yeah, I was at a coffee shop. I just got into an argument with this random rude person. And I knew that I was, my architecture class was going to be really hard. And I was totally stressed in that moment. And I was like, I figured. So we're laughing about it after the fact. We're talking about it. And it's very cool because he was like, he could go back to that place and not get defensive. And he was like, yeah, I know I was being irritable and it was because of this, 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 and this. So he's doing that for himself. And he's also forgiving himself. He's like, I know you're not going to define me based on one rude conversation. And I'm not going to let it lower my self-confidence and my self-esteem. This is what he's thinking to himself, because I'm just human and I was having a human moment. And I acted like a creep, so, and then he even said, he was like, yeah, sorry about that. And I was like, I totally knew what it was about. It's not a big deal.
And then this is a beautiful practice. It doesn't get in the way of the connection between parent and child. You can really, place it where it is, put it in the right context. So I'm curious, Randi, if you see some of the same things in the way you support clients as I do when it comes to parenting. Do a lot of the challenges you come across with a child's behavior or something challenging that's happening in the home, does it often come back to what's unresolved between the parents? Have you noticed that?
I think kids and their behavior, nobody likes to hear this. And whenever I tell someone this, I wait until we have a really trusting connection. And I'll say, okay, don't shoot the messenger here. But your kids, their behavior is usually a barometer of something bigger and deeper within you. What's going on in the marriage, what's unresolved within yourself. Like they show up and they hold the mirror up to exactly what it is that's unhealed within us. And this is usually not something that anyone wants to hear, especially at the beginning, because when people come initially, it's like, I have a child that refuses to cooperate. I have a child that refuses to listen. I have a child that 1, 2, 3 magic just doesn't work on. And I'm like, okay, it sounds to me like you have a change agent, amazing child. That's what I'm thinking. I'm like, this child is going to be your biggest gift. It's like they unlock the doors to the happiness kingdom because they're propelling you to learn a new way to communicate with them. And they're also the ones who are opening the door to say, hey, mom or dad, this is unresolved within you. And guess what? I'm here to remind you that this stuff, even though you've pushed it aside and you've buried it deep, it's going to keep coming up until you provide some sort of closure for it. So yes.
Absolutely. And gosh, the love we have for our kids is so big, we can't help but look in the direction that they're pointing us to.
I really got into this whole new conversation of parenting was I was like, okay, that didn't feel good for me as a kid. It doesn't make sense for me to repeat that same conversation. I'm going to do it differently. And now I have this baby that's crying all the time. And I'm hearing this old conversation, which is if you hold your baby too much, they're going to be spoiled. But now what I know is that my baby had a sensitive nervous system. And by holding him and wearing him all the time, it actually was like touch therapy for him. And it really helped him to calm that nervous system down, to help him to feel safe in the world. So if I would have listened to the old way of, if you hold him too much, he's going to be spoiled, I would have really missed the boat on, really supporting my child in the way that he needed to be supported.
So I'd love to hear, Randi, a few tips you might have for the listeners around how you might create a more peaceful home environment.
Always start with basic needs, sleep and nutrition. It really is important that we feed these little people on an ongoing basis, and it's not a free-for-all. It's not just letting them go into the pantry and help themselves whenever they want. I really feel like part of the role, and this is kind of old school, but as a mom, I have always felt this basic kind of primal need to feed my people. And I hate cooking. Like, I was not the kid that was hanging around in the kitchen learning from my mom and grandma how to cook. But all of a sudden I had these little people that needed to eat so many times a day, and or they acted like raging animals. And so yeah, I get dinner on the table, and it doesn't mean that it's this home cooked beautiful meal, but I get dinner on the table. I always make sure that I've got something with me on the go so that when I start seeing the angry animal come out, I've got something to offer to them. I go and a rebel by nature. I am not a person that loves organization or structure, but I've kind of had to adhere to certain amounts of it in my life because there's just people that they're not reading the signs of their body. And so it's up to me as the pack leader, as the mom, to provide the food. And so I think food is a big part of it. I think that the right food is important. I kind of go by the 80-20 rule, like 80% natural, grow from the earth, 20% you can have a little bit of the crap mixed in, normal. And sleep. And it's really important to put ourselves to bed, to have screens turned off within an hour of bedtime, to have an evening routine. It helps kids to feel that ritual. That evening routine really helps kids to feel safe in the world, and putting them to bed. And they really need to sleep 11 or 12 hours at night. I mean, it's an effort to get that much sleep, but I think it has to be prioritized.
Well, just think how much they're growing, how much the brain development, body growth, and the least. I mean, there's so much going on. And I don't know, I treat sleep like medicine at our house. I just think it's so essential.
It's so essential. And in this day and age, we don't even think about it, but turning those screens off and really limiting the amount of screen time is huge. And I know, look, I'm the first person to say it is an effective babysitter. And there are times we just need to get stuff done, and we need that. We want that babysitter. And so what I tell people all the time, because again, it's the 80-20 rule, is use it when it works for you. When you're making dinner, that's when they get to watch a show. and but really having the boundaries and the parameters around it, I think is important. The last tip I'll say is, I think transitions are hard for all humans. And so transition time is a time that causes a lot of frustration for a lot of kids and a lot of parents. And so one tip that I think is super helpful is to constantly use a timer, and you can just use like the timer in your kitchen on your oven, but reminding your kids, in 5 minutes, it will be time to turn off the TV. In 5 minutes, it will be time to walk out the door and get in the car for school. In 5 minutes, okay, I'm going to set the timer, or would you like to push the button? And that's great with little kids, because that empowers them. It's two positive choices. Like, you don't care if you set the timer, if they set the timer, and all of a sudden the 3-year-old or the 4-year-old feels all empowered that they set the button.
Mm-hmm.
And then when the timer goes off, have them turn the button off, and it's time to go. So really putting that in where you help them understand. You're not just springing a transition on them. You're giving them a little notice and a little warning.
That's a great practice. Yeah, I like that.
It's little, it's easy. It's like, of course, like this is not rocket science, but even just putting a tiny little tool like that into your daily life, it can lower the frustration levels by a lot.
That's it. And I think we're all looking for a little more flow and ease in the day-to-day. So that little tip is great. And all kids love to press buttons. So you got it right there.
Right. And you can use, and if you're somewhere out where they're playing and it's going to be hard to leave the park or whatever, you can always use your smartphone for good. And so, have that timer on your smartphone just become part of your day, where you're never springing the transition on them. And it helps them to also trust you more, that you're always going to let them know when a change is coming. Like, they don't have to worry that you're just going to spring things on them. And so it really does help to add trust to the relationship.
That's a good point, because if we place ourselves in our child's shoes, they're just being pulled around. Okay, it's time to go to the grocery store. It's time to do this. It's time to eat. And then we give them a little bit of notice as these changes come. I like that. It does build the trust.
And I like to say little kids are Zen masters. Like, we, as adults, we're all saying, oh, I need to put meditation on my list. I need to become more present, because our minds are going to those 90,000 thoughts we have a day, and we're always in another moment. But our kids actually, because they are, it's so much more basic for them. They are actually present in every moment they're in. So when they're playing and building that super important Lego tower, and they learn as they play, and we're like, come on, get on your shoes, get on your shoes, get on your shoes. And they're like, what are you talking about? There's nothing more important than building this Lego tower right now. And so we're getting into our child's perspective, and we're meeting them where they are, and we're letting them know, hey, wrap up the Lego tower. In 5 minutes, it will be time to walk out the door. Mm-hmm. So you have 5 minutes. You can enjoy your Lego tower. And when the timer beeps, that will be time to walk out the door.
Love it. I could see how that could bring a lot more peace and ease into the day-to-day. That's a great tip.
That's right. And when everybody's battling and feeling like they're on opposing teams, it's real hard to feel like you want to take the time to be the patient, positive, caring, loving, connected parent, because everybody's going like this. And so these tools really help everyone to go, to really unite and feel like a cohesive team.
Nice. Well, that is a family. That is great. And so I know you're starting the New Parenting Conversation on your Facebook page. And when are you hosting that, if any of the listeners would like to learn more about some of your tips and your tricks?
So I do this Facebook Live series. It's on Mondays. Mondays, it's 2:45 Central. So I think where you are, it's Eastern time.
That's right.
So it'll be 3:45, and I do it at 2:45 on Mondays, and I deal with real life scenarios that people write in and tell me about. And I walk them through how to have this new parenting conversation. And it's basically 3 steps that I call it 3 steps to a productive conversation with your kids. So we're replacing the lectures with an actual productive conversation that is effective. Like, why are we wasting our breath with the lectures like it's been done for so long when it's really falling on deaf ears? We want to have a productive conversation with our kids because that's how we build connections. That's how we become a family team.
Absolutely. Well, that's great. Well, thank you so much for sharing your time and your expertise with us. It was a real pleasure, Randi.
It was great being here. Great to see you.